But just now we're going to try and look at this chapter, this tricky chapter together. But I'm hoping with a little bit of effort, I think we'll be able to understand the wonderful message that this chapter contains. Now, all through this series, we've been using a book by Alastair Begg, and that's especially true today. It's been particularly helpful in preparing for this morning. Now, the title for today comes from Alastair Begg, and it's Take Heart, God Wins. And even if you get confused along the way, I want you to hold on to that title, Take Heart, God Wins, because that's the main message of this chapter this morning. But before we get into all of that, I want you to, I want you to think. I want to wonder, I guess, what your expectation is of the future. I'm wondering what your expectation is for the future for yourself and for our church, our congregation, and for the Christian church worldwide. What your expectation is. Now, if you're someone who's naturally optimistic, your expectation is that everything's going to work out fine. And if that's you, then you'll be someone who will enjoy hearing sermons and reading books about the victory of God and of his church. Well, if that's you, then you're going to enjoy chapter 7 of Daniel, because it's a chapter that tells us that things work out better than we could ever have imagined. But others are naturally pessimistic. Whenever they see society turning against Christianity, and I guess as well, when you add to that the impact of COVID-19, it seems that a growing number of believers are becoming quite pessimistic about the future. I think people more and more are preferring sermons that are designed or intended to prepare God's people to endure the suffering and rejection which is definitely part of the Christian life. If that's you, if that describes you, then chapter 7 of Daniel, it agrees that being a Christian is difficult, but it also reassures us that there's more hope than we might have ever realized. So no matter whether you're someone who's optimistic or pessimistic, this chapter 7 of Daniel, gives us an anchor to hold us both spiritually and emotionally too. As Alastair Begg, as he points out, chapter 7 tells us that things are far worse than we thought, but at the same time far better than we could ever have hoped for. And so by the end of today, it's my hope that we all realize and hold on to that important truth. That's what I want for all of us. But to get there, to get to the conclusion, we've got to get our heads around some very unfamiliar styles of writing. This genre or this style of writing that we're looking at today is known as apocalyptic writing, which is a very different way of looking at the world. Very different way of looking at the world and at looking at history, both past, present, and future. Now in Scripture, writing like Daniel chapter 7 to 12, in Scripture, writing this apocalyptic writing is normally used most in times of crisis. And so it's appropriate here in the second half of Daniel. Whenever life is so overwhelming, so confusing for those in exile like Daniel, so confusing that God's message can't be captured in the normal way of describing things. Daniel chapter 7 through to 12, well, these are chapters that are debated and discussed and argued about by experts and scholars. Some of them even produce elaborate theories about secret revealed mysteries. Even some will try to produce exact dates for events in history. But those dates have come and gone, and most of them, if not all, those predictions turn out to have been wrong. And so I want to suggest, along with Alastair Begg and other Christian writers too, I want to suggest that a much better way is to look for a simple message for our everyday life, as believers. And thankfully, that's a much easier task. Basically, the point of chapters 7 through to 12 is to make it clear that God is in control and that he has the future firmly in his hands. And that's true despite the seeming chaos of the world all around us. In other words, it's the same message as chapters 1 to 6. Now, I did say at the very start of this series that the purpose of this book is to say the same thing over and over again in different ways. To say again and again that the Lord is in control of the entire universe. And so you and I, we can trust him. We can trust him no matter what circumstances we face, no matter how difficult those circumstances are. And that's what chapters 7 through to 12 of Daniel, that's what they're all about too. Except they say things in a very different way. So we're not dealing here with narrative. We're not dealing here with a simple account of what Daniel experienced as an exile in Babylon. But instead we're dealing with a whole different way of describing things. That's what apocalyptic literature is. And the best way to understand verses like today is to try and picture what they describe in your mind. Try and picture what they say, I guess not like a stationary image, like a photograph, but like a map, like a rapidly moving image, more like an action movie. So as we work through these verses, as they appear up on the screen, try and picture it like a rapidly moving action movie. So let's get started. Chapter 7, verse 1 tells us that Daniel had this dream, this vision, in the first year of Belshazzar's reign. So that was back before chapter 5. You remember chapter 5 was when Belshazzar saw the writing on the wall during the party that he held. And if you're someone who likes dates, it was around 553 BC. Daniel describes his vision then, his dream. He describes it in verses 2 through to 8. And that was part of the reading, our scripture reading for today. Now notice how he switches to saying I. This is Daniel writing his own description, his own experience of this dream that he had. And it's a dream all about 4 beasts. The first beast was like a lion with eagle's wings which were torn off, and then the beast this creature is made to stand like a man and given the mind of a man. And the second beast was like a bear with 3 ribs between its teeth. And it was told to go and devour. The third beast then was like a leopard with 4 bird-like wings and 4 heads. And we're told that this third beast was given authority. And in the fourth beast, well, it was not like any animal that we know of. Instead, it's described as being terrifying and very powerful or strong, with iron teeth that it used to devour, and then it smashed what remained with its feet. It also had 10 horns. So that's the fourth beast. Now, all 4 of these beasts, we're told at the start of the chapter, all 4 of these beasts came out of the churning sea. Now, often in Scripture, the sea is used to represent the chaos of this sinful world. But notice that winds blow from heaven. The winds blow from heaven, causing these powerful, frightening beasts to emerge. So in other words, even though these beasts are frightening, They're not outside of heaven's control. They're not beyond God's authority. But what do the beasts mean? What's their interpretation? Well, Daniel's dream is basically a rerun of Nebuchadnezzar's dream back in chapter 2. Hopefully you remember the statue that was in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, with the different parts of the body with different metals right down to the feet that were made of clay. Well, the four beasts here in chapter 7 represent the same four empires as the statue did in chapter 2. I think we can be fairly confident about that because, well, as we move into the second half of this chapter, that's more or less what we're told. But even today, though, I think it's fair to say that different nations take on different animals to represent some aspect of their identity. So if I was to test you this morning, if I was asked you what country is represented by the kiwi, what would you say? Pardon? Yeah, New Zealand, or that part of the world certainly. Yeah, New Zealand. If I was to say the bear, what nation is the bear? Russia. Yep, Russia is represented by the bear. And here's the easiest one of all, the eagle. Yeah, the United States. Yeah, well done. Yeah, so today nations take on different animals to represent some aspect of their identity. So this first beast was like a lion with eagle's wings, and that represented Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire. And Alastair Begg, he's able to fill in some of the history and tell us that this eagle with wings, this lion with eagle's wings, was a symbol that often appeared on the gates of the city of Babylon. I'm guessing the archaeologists must have been able to confirm that for us. Then the second beast, like a bear, represents the Medo-Persian Empire that we encountered when we met Darius. And the three ribs in its mouth, well, that points to the fact that it was a nation that devoured and destroyed many other nations. And the third beast, like a leopard with four wings and four heads, well, it was an animal that could move fast and was dangerous. And it pointed to an empire that moved quickly and was just as destructive as well. So we believe it represents the empire of Alexander the Great, an empire which swiftly destroyed the Medo-Persian Empire and many others, just like this prophecy foretold. Alastair Begg, he points out that Alastair the Great, no, Alexander the Great, by the time he was 32, he controlled the empire that he controlled stretched across Greece, Egypt, Persia, and all the way to the borders of India by the time he was 32. But look at how verse 6 says that this third beast was given authority to rule. Given authority to rule. Now, it probably looked like Alexander the Great, looked like he seized power wherever he went. But no, says Daniel, the power of Alexander the Great, just like that of every other empire, was given by God. And the same is true today. Whether it's the United States or China or Russia or anywhere else, power and dominion is given by God. So it's not by chance. And there's nothing in world events which can ever be an obstacle to God's plan. It's all there. It's all part of God's plan. He controls and rules sovereignly over it all. And that takes us to the fourth beast then. And this fourth beast is not like any animal that we would recognize. Instead, it's like a terrifying mix of creatures, devouring with its iron teeth and then smashing with its feet. Like the fourth empire pictured by the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, this fourth beast represents the Roman Empire. In Scripture, horns represent power, and this creature has 10 horns, meaning that meaning that the empire it represents, it would have lots of power. And that was certainly true of the Roman Empire. Whenever it came along, just over 520 years after this dream that Daniel had foretelling it, well, that empire certainly had lots of power. And then next, Daniel's dream focuses on those horns, and on one little horn in particular, one horn that was more powerful than the rest, which basically represents evil personified, or evil in person. It even has human eyes and a mouth. It seems to represent a specific evil individual, or a type of individual perhaps. Alastair Begg suggests that this could be the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And he's probably right. You can read 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 later on, and you can decide for yourself whether you think that's a match for what Daniel's describing here. But this little horn in Daniel's dream seems to foretell this man of lawlessness, who represents proud, blasphemous humanity in rebellion against God. Those who deliberately and aggressively oppose God are still under God's sovereign control. We saw that back in verses 2 and 3 of this chapter. But their coming is by the activity of Satan. In 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 9, you'll see that. All of this forces us to recognize that Satan, or the devil, is real. He's active and he's hostile, and we must never forget that. Throughout history, God's people have suffered at the hands of evil persecutors directed by Satan, often without them even realizing that they're simply Satan's puppets. As Alastair Begg writes, the people of this world are being deceived and wooed by worldviews and religions that have been dreamt up by the evil one. We must never lose sight of that. If these ideas, if they sound far-fetched, then it's probably because we don't give much thought to Satan's activity in the world. But that's a fact that Scripture describes again and again. So we shouldn't be surprised when Christianity is sidelined and criticized. We shouldn't be surprised whenever Christians are prosecuted in the courts, or are persecuted by others, or whenever we're labelled as religious bigots, or even worse. You see, Christianity used to be respected, but that period is in the past, and it was something of an anomaly anyway. Because God's people have generally, in fact usually, been under attack, because Satan has made sure of that. The opposition that we face today, which probably seems quite foreign to most of us, is actually the norm. That's what's normal. The few hundred years whenever Christianity was well respected, that was the oddity, that was the abnormal part of history. Now, like our Christian brothers and sisters throughout most of history, we are called to stand firm and persevere, even though we suffer because of our faith in Christ. And we might ask, where's God in all that's happening here in this chapter? Well, Daniel's shown the answer to that question in the next little part of his dream, in verses 9 through to 12, that we're going to look at now. Now, we heard that phrase, Ancient of Days, in our song at the beginning of the service. And in that song and in these verses, it basically is a reference to God. And him being seated on his throne tells us that he's the one in supreme authority. All of the description about his clothing and his hair points to and represents his purity. the fiery throne and the river of fire represent God's judgment. And the thousands who are serving him and the tens of thousands that are all around represent the scale of what's happening in these verses. They point to the cosmic scale of the events being described. Now, all of these images are familiar to us from other parts of the Old Testament, especially the book of Exodus. And we did look at it a long time ago. Back in I think it was back in 2017, we looked at Exodus together. And we were familiar with some of these descriptions from that. But the overall message for Daniel and for us is firstly that we're not alone. It might, for Daniel, he might have felt alone serving God in Babylon. But actually, he was among those 10,000 times 10,000 serving God around his throne. And then secondly, we see that all of these earthly kingdoms represented by those beasts all crumble when the Lord sits in judgment. The same is true today. Every injustice will one day be judged when the books are opened. Empires and religions and philosophies and worldviews, many of them are opposed to God, and many of them have persisted for a long time, but each one will fall. Just like the Babylonian, the Medo-Persian, the Grecian and the Roman empires, each of them fell, and every other empire opposed to God will fall too. Yes, some of those worldviews and so on, philosophies and religions have persisted for a long time, and some even seem to be growing stronger, but none will last. None will last. Next then, someone else enters Daniel's dream. Someone who's described as one like a son of man. And if that description sounds familiar, it's because it's how Jesus described himself in the New Testament. This person in Daniel's dream is Jesus. Jesus, who is given everlasting, indestructible authority over every nation and empire. In this prophetic dream, Jesus, we're told, is not coming from the Father, but going to the Father, returning to him, it seems. And so this is a foretelling from Daniel's perspective. It's a foretelling of Jesus' return to the Father after his death and resurrection. Returning to the Father to be crowned as the conqueror of sin and death and Satan. Of him being crowned as the judge of all. In Acts chapter 1, whenever Jesus is lifted up into the clouds with the disciples all watching him, well, Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14 tells us what happens next, up beyond the clouds, as Jesus disappears out of the sight of the disciples. Daniel 7, 13 and 14 tells us what happened next. Now, we're all familiar, I hope, with the words of the Great Commission. Whenever Jesus says that all authority in heaven and earth has been given to him. Well, here in Daniel chapter 7, in these verses, we're reading a description of that coronation whenever Jesus is given that authority. And so us going to make disciples of all nations, that makes perfect sense. Jesus is King. And so us proclaiming the gospel and calling people from every nation to acknowledge Jesus as their King, that makes perfect sense. Telling them so that they can be welcomed into God's kingdom too. Jesus is King. And people need to know that. People need to know that so that they can bow before him too. So that they can bow before they too face destruction, just like the empires represented by the beasts in Daniel's dream. So let's tell them. Whether it's the lovely old lady next door, or whether it's the Muslim somewhere in Asia or in the Middle East, all need to hear about Jesus. So let's do all that we can to make that happen. Daniel 7 is not an easy chapter, and we're only halfway. But the second half is mostly the interpretation of the dream, and well, we've considered that. We've considered that together already. Plus, Daniel asks for and is told more to help him understand, especially about the fourth beast. It is worth reading if you haven't done so already. But I think it's fair to say that we've probably looked at enough. We've probably seen enough to know and to identify the main point of this chapter 7. The main point, which is that God has won, and God will win, and his people will reign. But the war is not yet over. That's Alastair Begg's summary, and it's spot on. God has won, but the war isn't over yet. So although Jesus has triumphed, until his second coming, when Christ returns, until then his church is still under attack from Satan. Satan who opposes us in every way that we can. But Satan is defeated. Satan is defeated, but only whenever Christ returns will Satan be fully and finally dealt with. And then he won't trouble God's people anymore. Until then, we fight on. We stand firm, resisting Satan's attempts to destroy us. But we stand firm knowing that God has already won. The end is certain. The end is glorious. But the path is tough. Society's opposition to Christianity only looks likely to become more hostile, and our beliefs more unacceptable. And obeying Christ looks set to become more costly. But Jesus rules supreme, and he will return, and then his people will be with him forever in his everlasting kingdom. Alastair Begg finishes his chapter on Daniel 7 with a quotation from John 16, verse 33. This is Jesus, the Son of Man, comforting his followers. Jesus says, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." I'm going to say that again because it's so important. We need to hold on to this when difficulty comes. In this world, these are Jesus' words, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. I think that's a great verse for us to finish on this morning. So let's pray together. Let's bow.